Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I actually just published, within 24 hours, the first recap for Dexter New Blood, the new season, the new show, I guess. It's not even a new season of Dexter. Since these episodes drop early on Sundays, thank goodness for this, by the way.
God.
It makes it much easier to record on the weekend. So we can get this one out pretty quickly. Hopefully get this one out today. We're recording this on Sunday, the day the episode dropped. Just to get some things out of the way, once again, make sure you subscribe to us so you know when new episodes are available. We're currently recapping Succession, which we will continue to recap. New episode tonight, and I'll be watching that. And a recap will be coming out later this week. Catch up on those if you haven't, plus other shows we recently wrapped up. Only Murders in the Building, as well as Nine Perfect Strangers, Loki, if you haven't caught up on that yet. And we will be covering, or I will be covering with the same co-hosts that we had for the Loki recaps, the Hawkeye show, which is starting at the end of this month. So many shows, Sona, right?
Too many shows.
It is too many shows. Way too many. And all the shows I don't get to watch on top of all that.
Like feast or famine. That's a good show.
And literally, it's the point, like, the only things I watch are the things I'm recapping. I do not have time to watch anything else. So, oh yeah. And of course, reach out to us, needsomeIntroduction@gmail.com. We'd love to get your feedback. So this episode, and we're going to lose our expletive on this right away. By the way, I've started putting expletives on our recaps already because of Succession. It's like, I can't capture any audio from that show without having F-bombs every 5 seconds. So the expletives are there. And we'll just get that out of the way.
Very true to life in New York City. What can we say?
By the way, last week's episode was actually called Cold Snap.
We did discuss that. Yeah.
They had Miss Snap. I think they had labeled it as a beautiful day or something like that, but it was actually Cold Snap. And to this point of expletives, this episode is called Storm of Fuck. Mm-hmm. So right off the top. So very briefly, before we dig into it, I like this episode a lot more than last week. You know, obviously they were setting things up last week. And
can I just chime in for 1 second before we talk about this week? This is so random, but I have been in trouble all week for watching the first episode without my husband. So, but I was trying to explain, I had to do it for the pod, but that was not carrying much water in my home. So I rewatched the first episode with my husband today, and I actually liked it more, I think, the second time around. And one really random thing that I wanted to note that I think was a callback to the first season and the first episode. If I recall correctly, in the actual season premiere of regular Dexter, he brings a box of donuts to his office in the first episode. And if I remember right, Dokes is the only one who won't eat the donuts. And there's a whole thing about like what's going on between him and Dokes can tell something's just not right with him. And in this first episode, he also brings donuts to his office, the hunting store, and offers them to his boss. So I thought that was a cute little callback. You
know what? I totally forgot about that till you mentioned it. And then, of course, it is such a big part of the Dexter show. Like, you literally, throughout the entire show, you see him showing up every day with a box of donuts. And I guess this was his way, maybe his dad or somebody taught him this is the way of him
ingratiating yourself, seeming normal.
Exactly. Just like once going back to that theme of like, pretending to be the person you're supposed to be, which of course is, his modus operandi. Beyond that is another interesting point I think you bring up there is we see it in this episode specifically is the calendar, right? Where he's like, you got to stay on the program, right? And I think donuts and all this process is part of this program he's on, right? It's like it's once again, just back to the second season of the original recipe, Dexter, where he's like, it's like he's in an Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, right? Because he's
the calendar made me laugh though, because it actually, while it's true, it is like that. It also reminded me of like at a factory, like X number of days without an incident, like 365,000 days without a murder.
Exactly. I actually thought I took the exact same note with us having Disney Plus, and during COVID, my daughter watched so many Disney movies, I should say. Mm-hmm. And of course, I think about Monsters Incorporated, where they're like, days since an incident, it goes back to zero. And that's what I was thinking in my mind, going like, Dexter's like,
exactly.
Oh, we messed up that pattern. Back to day one. It's like being an alcoholic, right? Same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do right away. I had a lot of questions last week going like, I hope the show answers some of these questions. And they do answer them right away. So, he says, must have been a long trip. And now we find out Harrison came from Buenos Aires. And I like that they just drop all this information, which we do need, just into conversation. They're not sitting there and doing an exposition dump, which was good.
Yes, I was happy to have that explained. Yes.
And then we also get a feel for how long it's been. He says, now we know it's been 10 years in total. So he did go to Oregon, by the way, right? We find out Hannah died. She had cancer. well, this is the story we hear anyway, so I'm not 100% sure we believe everything that Harrison says, by the way, but she did die of cancer. She died somehow. And Harrison finds the letter. He gets sent to the US about 3 years ago into foster care. But from the letter, he had been able to track down Dexter back to Oregon, where he was no longer, of course. And from there, doing some snooping on the internet, he eventually found a photograph of Dexter here in New York, and that's what brought him here. So we get all this information.
Social media will get you every time.
Yes, exactly. Right. That's like seems to be a theme now with all these shows, which of course is probably true.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question for you, by the way. So this is probably very minor, but Harrison walks in, he goes over to like the area where Dexter has all his tools, and he picks up a butcher's knife. And then I thought he was going to pick up the butcher's knife and he just starts walking somewhere. I thought he was going to walk into, I should say he's going to replace it in the kitchen. And unless I missed it, I actually think that he goes into his bedroom after that. So is he hiding a knife in his room?
Wow, I totally missed that. Perhaps because I was actually trying to eat while I watched this episode. I totally missed that.
It's very minor. It could be completely not important because they're talking. Dexter, we're cutting back and forth between the two of them. So it could be that he like did go and put it in the kitchen, and like they just, when they edited the scenes together, they just cut that part out. Like maybe I'm overreading into it, but I'm maybe overly wary. I'm curious whether Harrison is for real or not, or 100% for real. I think there's truth in what he's saying. I don't know what percentage of that is true though. So maybe that's me just being a little oversensitive, or maybe me just looking for clues, but I was curious.
I'm just happy we got some acknowledgement that he was in Oregon and now he's not.
Yes, finally, right? We were so confused about that. Everybody, the whole internet was confused about that last week.
Yes.
It was the chatter of the internet. Oh, and then in the middle of this, Deb is there with her bullet tapping on the glass. Boy, Deb is more annoying dead than she's ever been alive.
I disagree because I found her very annoying alive. So to me, this is just a continuation of my aggravation with that character.
She's in her hospital gown this time, so she does change her outfits, and then we do see her in like a parka later on. So I guess she does get to change clothes here, luckily for the actress. And then she, has a very aggressive scene with Michael C. Hall. I'm like, is that working out some of their divorce tension? I actually made call outs to the needle drops here, like the music that's playing. So we have Beck playing at one point, and then we have later on, we have Dinosaur Jr. playing. I'm like, what is this, 1993? Like, where are we in time?
Well, upstate New York can feel like a throwback in defense of those choices. Yeah. Sometimes it does feel like time stands still up there.
True. Good point.
Not to alienate anyone. And also on that note, both me and my husband commented that this is the most diverse upstate New York town we have ever seen in our lives, which kind of makes me think, of our prior conversations of how much diversity, as much as I appreciate diversity and it's important to me, how much of it is realistic and how much of it is diversity for the sake of having diversity. But that's a whole other side conversation.
Well, you know what? I'll throw it in here because I do think this is potentially something that the show could deal with. The first thing is that, although I never really think about Native American populations up in...
No, that part I'm fine with. That part I think is very realistic.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, because there actually is an upstate, pretty big population.
No, of course. No, that part is realistic. But the African American population, the Latin American population, in my experiences with upstate New York, small town upstate New York, where everybody knows everybody, that kind of situation, I personally have not seen that. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it's not something that I've witnessed. Oh, and also the open gay relationships as well. I'll throw into that. I was up there this summer and there were a lot of Confederate flags, but maybe.
This is true, though. I mean, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, you do see a lot of that, unfortunately, still. I don't know what they think the Mason-Dixon line is.
Yeah, I mean, yes, showing that. I don't want to alienate anyone, but okay. I'm just saying, I have not seen that level of diversity in my personal experience. That's all.
So then we're actually seeing there as well that this girl, I call her the sacrificial lamb. I still don't remember her name, but the girl we met last week, she's somewhere drinking. I don't know where she got that champagne bottle from, in a hotel. And
chocolate covered strawberries, I think, as well, right?
Yeah, and she's definitely being poisoned, right, or dosed for something to make her.
Yeah. I mean, come on, when a bottle of Dom Perignon is too good to be true, it's...
And I don't think this is much of a spoiler, by the way, but the dad, the character actor who plays Matt's dad, who we see in full face by the end of the episode, is the person watching her on the camera.
I was not 100% on that. You think so?
Oh, it's absolutely the case. Yeah. I mean, he's a
Okay.
very recognizable face. And as a matter of fact,
I see.
For me, he's done so much character work. For me,
So
it was so
nobody could
recognizable.
find him because he was too busy watching this girl. Okay.
Yeah. They tried to call him for hours. Apparently he was just staring at the camera the whole time. He had his, he did misuse the notification silencing on the new iPhone.
See, I had a lot of confusion because for whatever reason, and I'm not saying this is the show's fault, it's probably my fault. I assumed that the millionaire that was having the business meeting in the diner that passed out the hot cocoa, I thought that was Matt's dad, but I don't know why I thought that. But so I was very confused as to like why they were saying they couldn't get in touch with him when the police chief had been over there. And like, it didn't click for me until the end there, that those were two separate people.
Oh yeah, no, it's two completely different people. Yes. And I had the confusion last week. Actually, I suspected for whatever reason that character was going to be Matt's dad, the one we met last week. And then it wasn't until this week when she shows up to like borrow his copter. They would have been more like, have you heard from my son or something? Something would have been brought up at that point.
That's fair. Yeah.
And then, but anyway, my point is that I saw the character just a quarter of his face, half of his face, depending on the different times we cut to him. And he's so recognizable to me because I've seen him so many times that I'm like, oh, that's that actor. So then when he shows up in full face at the end, I'm like, well, obviously it's the same person. It's the person I identified before.
Well, you identified him just from his eye and his eyebrow.
I did. And also I was kind of looking for him in the show anyway, because I did see him in the upcoming, in the season previews, the trailer.
Okay.
So I knew he was in there somewhere. And then when I saw him, with the hair color and the eye color, I could pretty much identify him.
Gotcha.
And the old face, that old face.
Yes.
You already brought up the whole very funny calendar with the crossed out, like,
yes. Damn it.
Days since an incident, right? And then, of course, he also catches himself being sloppy. This is after he goes outside and he's like, oh, wait, where's his blood? Where's his blood trail coming from? Oh, my goodness, where did this come from? What happened? He didn't know what the source of that was. So he starts digging it up. And then, of course, at that very moment, police force shows up. Angela shows up and everybody. And they're basically saying, hey, what we already saw in the preview, which was she's like, hey, we're going to set up out here. And he's just like, oh, great. Right. Perfect. So a couple of questions on this, on him covering his tracks, literally. First of all, is that the blood is still red the next day? And I'm like, is that the case? Like I've never bled.
Interesting question. Maybe because the snow is wet. Would that keep it red?
Yeah, I don't know. And not that I've, ever bled out on the lawn, during a snowstorm, but, there's definitely been times when whatever, you spill a coffee or something leaks onto and the next day, just because the wind blows the snow or whatever, you can't see the tracks, you can't even see, if we get a rabbit running through the lawn in the middle of the night, the snow is pretty much obscures it. There must have been no wind at all. And once again, the color of the snow, would it be red the whole time? And like you said, I thought the same thing. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe this is just the way blood reacts because it's frozen, right? So possibly, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. And that had not occurred to me. So I do not have the answer to that.
I'll have to do some Reddit research on that.
Yes.
Oh, and then, of course, very awkward. That is just like, oh, who's this young guy living inside your house? Oh, it's my son that I never mentioned to you, even though we've been dating for 2 years. So very.
But she gets credit for going with the flow on that one, though.
She does, and she has a little bit of her own history. We find that later. So I guess she is a little more.
There was a moment where she seemed completely furious on the inside, but. Yeah. But for the most part, for a woman in that particular situation, she really just went with it.
As far as my confusion with the timeline, first of all, this actor, who I think is 25 years old, actually does look pretty young. So I don't think he looks like he's 25. He looks like he's 18 or 19, I'd say. And then we find out that he's, from the math here, once again, we don't have an explicit age on him, but we know it's been about 10 years since Dexter disappeared. And she mentions that it's almost time for him to start thinking about college, right? Or college prep. So which puts him at 16, 17. So okay, he leaves when, 6, 7, that doesn't seem so far off because Rita dies in season 4. Harrison's about 1 or 2 when she dies. The show's on for another 4 years. So that does put him at around 6 or 7 years old, right? Not that the seasons would correlate directly to 1 year, but it doesn't seem so strange now that I kind of do the math.
Okay.
Then mother, daughter, they're attracted to this stranger from out of town. She's like, oh, so something new. I'm curious about this guy.
Honestly, I'd be desperate to meet someone new if I lived in that kind of circumstance as well. So
especially her boyfriend seems like kind of a douche. So it's
right. Zach, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Out in the woods, he's, covering his tracks. He goes on an exploration with Harris and he gets Angela to let him participate. This is Dexter. And they run out on the snowcat, I guess they call it. And he goes, covers his tracks literally, right, by running over them. His son actually is the one who spots the buck. And he says, oh, I'll stay here and, you go head back, get them, and then get them to come back out here. And we'll see if this is part of the scene. And he basically covers up more blood trail. Deb is there cackling away annoyingly. So annoyingly.
Well, okay. So I am in the same situation I have been with Deb in years. So I am at the same level of annoyance, but I think she had a valid point. Can you Windex a rock and get rid of the evidence that way?
She does have a good point with that. I mean, you know what? Dexter probably knows more better than me. He's a blood expert, right? So I guess Windex does kill 99.9%.
The alcohol, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, we were all Windexing when we, right, with COVID, right? They said Windex is a good, so I don't know. I guess it kills something, right? So
I did not ever Windex because I had, in a really weird stroke of events, I had just bought Lysol from Costco. So I never had to resort to those Lysol alternatives.
And then as part of that, he also plants Matt's glove near the highway to kind of say, okay, he killed this buck and then tried to make his escape. And that is the story that they seem to go with at first anyway.
Yes.
Then we see another creepy rich guy, which of course is the same guy, the oil baron. They borrow his copter to kind of help with the search. Maybe this is a serious exploration of something potentially here. Angela's adoptive daughter is wearing this Indigenous women, a missing Indigenous women t-shirt.
Yes, which is really a huge issue, by the way.
Exactly.
It's honestly like horrifying how many of those women go missing, and it's just never acknowledged the way it is for women of different ethnicities in our country that do go missing and get those resources so that they can find out what happened to them. So many of these women, no one ever finds out what happened to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a podcast that's very popular in the past year or so. It's probably been on for a few months now. And I'll do a full recommendation for it in a future episode because I don't know the title and everything. So I will circle back on that, but I'll just introduce the topic now. It's all about these missing Indigenous women that over like the past decade, just all these women disappearing and they're like invisible, right? And so like I said, hopefully, for a show, they're not just using this for exploitation. I hope that they do explore this a little bit because it is an important topic that is starting to get some attention. Like you mentioned, that there is this like never ending fascination every time a blonde girl gets murdered somewhere. And this is like the story cycle for months and months. And minority women disappear all the time and are they're like invisible, right?
Yeah.
So then there's a pretty funny scene where we see that they are, have extracted the bullet from the deer to identify it, so they're going to be able to match it up to Matt's gun. Dexter's like getting shivers of exultation or something from watching this happen. And the police officer's there going like, I know it's rough, right? Because you can see that he's reacting. He's like, yeah, you never really get used to it, do you? And he's just like, meanwhile, his mouth is watering. He's trying to hold it in. And this is after that is when Angela has that conversation with him and mentions the whole situation that, I have secrets too. As a matter of fact, my daughter's actually an adopted daughter.
Well, she seemed bizarrely excited that they could share like parenting issues together. Like, I mean, I get, again, it's a small town, so maybe this is a real legitimate issue. And I mean, it's always good to have someone you can talk to. Like, I really enjoy talking to other working moms because like they get it. But she seemed like bizarrely excited to me for what this means for their relationship. But hey, more power to her.
Oh, we're going to cut to the girl again. And this is when we see that she kind of is finally more fully aware. This is the girl who we've seen abducted earlier in the episode. Once again, I don't know her name, but we were introduced to her briefly last week. And the question I have there is, so
how did she not notice there were cameras in the room? Because that's the question I have.
Yeah, and not notice that the doorknob was missing as well, right?
I'm thinking maybe someone took away the doorknob at some point.
I think they moved her into another room. I think they moved her into another room. I think so. I think she was probably picked, like, she was drugged and probably picked up and moved to another room, I think. And I didn't go back and look to see if the rooms actually look different or not. But, but it can't be true because he was watching her the whole time. So no, that's wrong. Yeah. So
I just felt like the cameras were so obvious. I just didn't understand how she couldn't have seen that, but.
So I have two questions for you. One, what's your guess? It says you're already dead. Is that one of the girls who were held here warning her? Or is this him messing with her? Like, who would have written that under that camera?
Interesting question. I assumed it was the person holding her.
It'd be a weird thing to write there.
Yeah, but if you get off on terrifying people, like by removing doorknobs and stuff, like
you write it on the wall. It's kind of a hidden place to put it, right? Like, I mean, they could have like written it on the door or something, you know?
I don't know, maybe because it's like, as you're realizing somebody's watching you, you're understanding what your fate might be. I don't know. For whatever reason, I assumed it was her, whoever is holding her captive. But that doesn't, I just jumped to that. I didn't really consider any other option.
It makes perfect sense that it's part of the psychological torture, right? It just seems so subtle. You know, it's like there's many ways you could kind of, like, for example, like you already know that she's probably already pretty terrified. There's many ways you could kind of tease her that out for a while, right? In a way, like letting her think that she's going to be safe for a while. And then, you know, I mean, thinking like, I'm just trying to think like a psychopath here, but it's like, it might be better to like kind of give some hope and then not, you know, that might be a better way to taunt her or to milk the fear.
Interesting.
Oh, and the second question I had for you was, and this is me maybe being overly, you know, still looking for possible clues that may not be there, but Angela is the one who said, you know, you should stay the night. Let me find you a place, right? So did Angela send her to this place? Like, is Angela feeding girls to this thing? Seems kind of contradictory to her concern with all these missing indigenous
right. Again, something I had not considered at all, that I was a little bit confused as to like whether she had gone to that shelter that had been referenced, and this somehow, like, the shelter is funneling girls into this situation. You know, because she had pointed out that woman on the dance floor, right, saying she runs the shelter.
Yep.
So that's kind of where my mind went, is that the shelter lady isn't on this somehow. But I feel like we are supposed to feel that Angela is a pretty strong character, I think.
I think so too. I would assume that, you know, unless she's trying to prevent something worse from happening in some way, or she's being blackmailed. It does seem she does seem like you're trying to set her up as a police officer whose intentions are in a good place, right?
Right, I think.
But then you do see her like being, maybe that's part of the reason she's so terrified of her daughter being out of her sight, right? Because she might know what happens to some of these girls.
That's an interesting point.
But then, of course, the other thing that it could be related to is her daughter confronts her and says, "Leave me alone, Mom. I'm not Iris." So is Iris like a sister of hers who maybe disappeared?
That's what I'm guessing. Is it, given her age, I think Iris is her sister. But yeah, that's what my theory there. I also, for a second, thought the daughter was Iris's daughter, but then that doesn't seem to be the case. So.
And then we have a good conversation between Dexter and Harrison. Dex covers himself up pretty well here. And I think it's a good conversation as well, where he basically says, hey, in the letter you said, let me know if Harrison has any of these dark tendencies. And Harrison takes it on himself saying, like, did you run away because I had some behavioral issues of some kind? And he knows, like, he's admitted earlier on that he had addiction problems, etc. So so maybe he did see, like, his dad somehow saw these things in him and he blamed himself for Dexter running off. And then Dexter makes a good argument saying, actually, no, I didn't want to be bad influence on you. All of this is true. You know, he's hiding the truth and telling him the truth at the same time. So I thought all of that was done pretty well.
I agree. And I also like this idea of Harrison jumped to cover for Dexter immediately as far as who his true identity is. I mean, with the idea of, like, I just don't want cops in my business, which is kind of funny. But as he gets closer, of course, to the cop's daughter, you start confiding things and whatever. And it will be interesting, I think, to see that develop.
Yeah, I agree. And there's going to be tension here between all these different threads, like you mentioned. Oh, and then that leads us to the last, the closing scenes there, where we see that Matt's dad shows up. Like I said, a very recognizable character actor. If you see the show, I honestly don't know this actor's name. Unfortunately, I should know.
I honestly don't recognize him, but that really means nothing. So.
Yeah, if you go to like Internet Movie Database and you like click on him, you'll see he's been in like hundreds, and he's been in like every single procedural as a criminal. Most of
gotcha.
He's been a regular on shows as well, and he's one of those guys. Exactly, those guys, literally, right? And so he's shows up.
Guy.
He's that guy. Yeah. And so he basically says, "We're going to keep looking," and Angela goes, well, I'm sorry, I guess, Dex, we're going to stick around here for another 24 hours or something. We're going to work through the night. And then it's funny that you're talking about how slow Succession is. I was laughing to myself. I'm like, could you imagine this whole season of show happens in one day?
Maybe.
I don't think that's going to be the case, but it would be funny if like the next episode is like the next 2 hours and then it's like 24 or something.
I will say again, like, I'm just having so many misunderstandings with this show. For some reason, I thought that Matt was in the fishing hole. I don't know why. And they made it clear at the end that he's actually under the fire pit.
Oh yeah, no, I think they definitely hinted at that. Yeah, and that's the gruesome stinger on this whole episode, right? Is that they are literally, warming themselves over his body, and we see that grisly, kind of bad CGI, grim. But still, it is still pretty grisly.
It was grim. Mm-hmm.
But I think you're absolutely correct. He literally mentions that, okay, it's not, in last week's episode, Dexter said it's not like the marine, it's not like the marina or the bay or whatever, exactly, but it'll do. And he saw like a poster of the ice fishing season had started. So exactly like you said, I'm like, oh yeah, he must have dumped him, through the fishing holes, right? But no, apparently that's not what he did. So, but that was definitely it was hinted at last week for sure.
Yeah.
And that's about it. On the coming attractions, we see, I think, Eric Andre for a split second is a cameraman, a buffoonish cameraman. So I do like Eric Andre.
That, but I'm a fan of his. So
yeah, so I do hope he shows up. If I did correctly identify him. We also see a bear, confronting Dexter, which looks like a pretty big action sequence for the show. And we also see that there's like a sniper, somebody wearing a ski mask in a white parka. Mm-hmm. So maybe Matt has hired a mercenary to track down the killer, possibly. So all question marks for next week, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, for sure.
So how'd you like the episode overall?
I enjoyed it. And I think, as I said, rewatching the first episode, I actually liked it better on the second watch. And I then watched the second episode immediately after. So like it was kind of a nice flow. I enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the development of the American Indian aspect of this. That's a culture I find really interesting, and I don't think we see enough of it in the media. So I liked how that is getting woven into the story. I liked how they're showing the police chief is kind of caught between those two communities. So I'm really interested to see what happens with that as well.
I liked it too, more so than the first episode, even though it's based on an existing show. I always kind of go by, I basically consider that first episode almost like a pilot episode, because I'm sure that's what they wrote to get the green light. Yeah. And in general, with me, I don't think pilot episodes are ever very good, because they just have a lot of work to do. So I thought it was fine. It introduced Dexter. As a matter of fact, me writing shows that no one will ever fund, my version of the show would have actually spent more time with him in the flow of this kind of like idyllic life he's in, and then disrupted by these things. Mm-hmm. But obviously that requires a level of patience that maybe most viewers won't have. If anything, it feels...
I mean, one thing that Joel and my husband and I were discussing is it was definitely a choice to have him kill someone in that first episode in order to hook people in, because, normally you'd think you'd see a little bit more before he goes for the murder, but they made sure to get that into the, that last 15 minutes.
I completely agree. Like the version of the show I would have preferred to see was introducing this antagonist, and then him really having to control himself, especially with his son there, and then him finally doing it, maybe in episode 2, right? Maybe at the end of episode 2, let's say, they probably said, well, we got to have him kill somebody right away, because people are going to
otherwise you're not going to hold people. Yeah,
exactly. But I think a better version of the show would have made us wait, and it also would have made more stakes, because then it would be like Dexter's reconnecting with his son. He's living this clean life. Can he do it? No, he can't, right? Instead of just being like, he killed somebody right away. Exactly. It's just like that. He obviously is not going to, right? So I would have rather let him drag that out a little bit more. But there would be more suspense for me anyway. But that's my version of the show I would like to see. And it sounds like you guys would have preferred that too. But I think that there's just a need to get Dexter killing again for the...
I mean, as we were saying, there's just too much stuff out there to watch. So if you don't hook somebody pretty quickly, they're just going to move on to the next thing. So I do get it from a marketing perspective, or that type of thing.
On a separate note, did you have a chance to see Yellowjackets?
I have not, but I saw the little preview that came on before Dexter, and it seemed really interesting.
So I'm going to put this here just to flesh it out more. I'm going to make a recommendation to you, basically, and then you can watch it on your own term. It's been online. Showtime has had it online for multiple weeks now, but officially the first episode airs tonight for the very first time. This is the official premiere date for the show. So you're not behind, basically. If you turn the TV on tonight, it'll be on, but I do highly recommend it. And, I recommend
it to watch it.
I'll recommend it to the audience as well. I have a question for you, whether I don't want this to be a spoiler or not, because I went in completely unspoiled just based on the reviews, but how bad do you see what's happened in the past? Do you see in the preview? What do you see in the preview? Describe the preview to me that you saw.
From what I saw, it was the only thing that I could really synthesize. I don't think I'm good with quick cuts. I think I really don't pick up a lot in the quick cuts. My brain is too slow to process it. The only thing I definitely know happened is that there was a plane crash.
Okay. So then I won't spoil it for you, but I'm pretty sure it's in the full trailer. And as a matter of fact, I literally saw it in the headlines, when people were in the reviews, a key plot point, which is revealed in episode 1.
Go for it. It doesn't bother me.
But is not, I didn't think it, I thought it's a little bit of a spoiler, but the premise of the show, which I highly recommend, by the way, this first episode, I don't know if the whole rest of the show is going to be as good as this first episode. It's directed by Karen Kusama, who also directed like Jennifer's Body, which is like a movie that was hated at the time and now has gotten like reclaimed as like this feminist horror movie. But also more recently, just a few years ago, directed The Invitation, which was a horror movie that got wildly praised. And then she also directed Destroyer with Nicole Kidman, which got Nicole Kidman a few award nominations. So she's kind of returned to Hollywood in the past few years. And she does an excellent job of directing this first episode. There's 2 tensions going on. We have this situation, you have this teen drama element of the show, which I don't always go for, but there's this roiling tension, this horror sense in the tone of the show that's always there, even in the high school moments, that makes it somehow, makes that material work for me in a way that maybe it wouldn't if the tone was a little different, if it felt a little more like free-form television or something. So anyway, the tone of the movies. I
wonder which show you're talking about, Victor. Anyway.
I can't imagine which one I mean. But the tone is really interesting. The story jumps back and forth. You see these women in present day. The casting on most of these women is great, the young women versus their older counterparts. But where we're flashing back and forth to, they were on a soccer team together. Their plane crashed. And this is not a spoiler at all. I won't go into all the details of it, but you see this in the opening scene of the show, is that someone in the past, one of these girls, is being chased through the forest, and she falls into like a bear trap and is killed, like in the very first scene of the show. So not a spoiler at all. And then you see that there are these people in the woods wearing like masks, and it's very horrific. The imagery basically are now like dragging her body out of this hole. And then what we're leading up to in the context is these women in present tense. One of them is, it all takes place in New Jersey, by the way. So all these different landmarks and stuff are like towns they reference, or, it's one of the journalists is trying to interview all these girls to find out what happened. They're like digging up the story again, writes for the Star Ledger. So it's very entertaining. Oh, wow. It's all stuff that, I actually think, I don't know what towns they shot in, but it looks like they shot in Montclair. So it's very interesting to, all stuff that, just that is kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure.
And the actresses are all great. The adult actresses, the teenage actresses, a little more mixed, but everyone does a good job overall. And just jumping back and forth.
It has a lot of big names in it. It has Christina Ricci, and I can't remember who else right now, but I was surprised. Juliette Lewis, yeah, exactly. And there was one more that I was like, oh, I didn't know she was in this, and I can't remember her name now.
Yeah, and there's more. We haven't met everybody from between the flashbacks, and part of it is I think they're holding back some of the characters, partially because we don't know if they survived. So because at this point we've only met, I think, 3 or 4 of the girls from back then, although there was many more on the plane. So I think that they're kind of hiding some of the reveals, because they are going in the previews for this week, for the second episode, they show that they are like on a road trip to go talk to somebody who knows like too much or something. So there are other people who survived this, but I think a lot of this is a guessing game to see like who survived this whole thing. And it's the very last moments of the episode. So I'm going to spoil a tiny little thing that happens at the end of the episode, although I'm pretty sure it's in the trailer. Basically, they resort to cannibalism.
Oh my God.
Yes. So the final scenes of this are pretty grisly stuff. Yeah. But and then now we find out that's what that girl was being stalked for in the first place. So like I said, that's at the very end of the episode, but I believe it's like one of the opening scenes of the trailer. So, they give it away there, and they put it, like I said, even in the reviews, I was seeing it right away. But I do highly recommend that. And it is, I don't know if it's going to stay this good, but as a single episode, it is very, very good. It's very tense. The actresses do great work. And there's all these kind of speaking to each other and saying things to each other without really saying them. So it's very, very well done. Yeah. And also seeing the tension, they're laying the groundwork for these frenemies, like they had to work together on this soccer team and were like best friends on the soccer team, but also laying these tensions, the tensions between them. Because and now once again, it makes you watch like Lord of the Flies or something, how are these tensions going to create rifts when they're trapped on this in this circumstance? So yeah, I mean, a very good pilot, and we'll see how the rest of the show goes. All right, so to fill out the episode, I did want to continue our sociopath of the week conversation, but I did have a conversation where I was trying to watch the show You, which reminds me a lot of Dexter. But where I left off in our previous conversation was I had watched season 1 almost all the way through. I was like one episode left. I had only the season finale of episode 1. And then, of course, Netflix being Netflix, I rolled directly into season 2, episode 1. And I was going to pretty much give up on the show after season 1, but I decided to watch a little more. And I wanted to give you my experience of it because of, I found it interesting, my reaction to it. So the first thing I was going to mention, you mentioned to me in the last conversation how You still had these like commercial breaks in it, even though it was on Netflix. And what I wanted to mention to you is I found it interesting that in season 2, episode 1, they really didn't have it, but they do reintroduce it later in the series. So it was interesting that they kind of almost made one long episode for season 2 to start it off with, this new Netflix relationship, but then they did kind of go back to the pattern of how they had written the show before, probably just for continuity, so it felt like the same show, to be honest. But I did think it was interesting that they changed it. And the reason I wanted to bring this up was because I didn't really love the way season 1 wrapped up. I wasn't a big fan of season 1 in general, but I watched season 2, episode 1, and I really, really liked the first episode of season 2.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I was thinking, why did I like this so much? And I think part of it was that, first of all, I like the fact that they didn't have those breaks. So they kind of made it one long story. I like the fact that it was, maybe I like the manic pixie dream girl motif of this new character in season 2.
Would.
Yeah, I know, but hear me out on this. So I was like, so maybe that's why. So I was kind of like rooting for them a little bit more because I saw the appeal of this girl more so than I saw in last season. And then I liked, I had watched the whole pilot. The pilot, or I guess the season premiere of season 2. I had liked all of it. And then they pull the rug out from underneath you at the end. And I'm like, ooh, I like the way they did that too, that he's just been stalking this girl the whole time. So like the show was, showing and not telling, doing the thing that the first season was supposedly trying to do, but doing it like as a perfect little one episode thing, right? Where he's trying to be the perfect boyfriend, but of course he's the perfect boyfriend because he's stalking her, right? And, and it's like the show is doing that to us as the viewers. So I'm like, oh, so clever, so clever. I loved the way it started. But so I watched that first episode and I'm like, ooh, maybe the show got way better in season 2. So I watched episode 2. And then by the time episode 2, there's a hitman. He has a finger cut off. They have it reattached and nobody notices somehow this whole entire time. All this stuff is going on. And I'm like, I don't know. So I'm going to go the Joel technique. I saw the first 2 episodes.
Oh, no. Oh, yes. My gosh. I cannot even imagine for that season. Okay, go ahead.
Exactly. So I'm like, I'm going to do the Joel technique here. I saw the first 2 episodes. I'm going to watch the last 2 episodes. And I was like, what the hell is going on? I get to the end of the show. Spoilers for season 2 of You, by the way. Everybody out there, if you have not seen it, you can skip the rest of this conversation. But spoilers for season 2 of You. I jump to the end and I'm like, what the hell? She's got a twin brother. He was sexually molested when he was younger. He thought he killed it, but it was actually somebody else. They're being kidnapped to write a script. The ex-girlfriend is back. She's the one who's like, I'm like, what the hell is happening on the show? Like, based on the first episode, and even based on this crazy finger, chopping off guy that, conveniently there's no problem reattaching a finger and no one notices. Even an intimate, partner doesn't even notice this is happening. Regardless of that level of craziness, by the end of the season, I'm like, what the hell is going on here? This is like a completely different show. Like, what is Oh my God. So I was just like, wow, I was so glad I did not watch that whole season. Like, holy cow. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to tell you that because I found it very entertaining that I'm like, I saw the season 2, episode 1. I'm like, wow, this is really my kind of show. And I got to watch the finale. They're like, thank God I didn't watch this thing. Thank God I didn't watch this. Oh boy.
That's hysterical.
What a reversal. What a reversal. I'm like, this show's finally on my wave. Like, no, it's much worse than last season. Much worse.
I agree with you. It was trying to do too much.
Yes, too much indeed.
Well, thank you for giving it a try. And please do let me know what Kim says about season 3 if she ever finishes it.
She is watching season 3. She has watched the first couple of episodes.
Is she enjoying it so far?
She is. I think she's enjoying it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. She told me, like it's all, over the top and everything, but she's.
It's so over the top.
She knows. She knows that from watching the show. Obviously, if you've seen season 2, you're like, wow. The show's definitely over the top. So and that's what's so funny of watching the show, is seeing, especially when they're trying to like get into his backstory and stuff like that about this, his mother and whatever that backstory is. I don't know the details of it because I didn't watch the whole season, but they're fleshing that out. That there is so much of it that does, like you said already, it really more and more so reminds me of Dexter.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you that it is like he is maybe more unforgivable than Dexter.
Oh yeah, no, for sure, for sure, yeah.
Oh, and the other thing I want to mention is, even though I didn't see all of season 2, so I'm not going to give it a ranking one way or the other. And obviously, like I mentioned before, not a show I want to watch, but obviously I am wrong because the show is hugely popular. So if you guys like it, go out, love it, enjoy it. It's just not for me. But I do want to give it credit for certain things, even though I don't really enjoy it. First of all, that it is clever in the way it's written. I love I think it was episode 2 of season 2. It might have even been episode 1, but I think it's episode 2, where he goes to meet that guy. Who, by the way, ends up being his friend at the end after. That's very strange, by the way, that he's like calling him up for like relationship advice and stuff at the end of the show, at the end of season 2. But that guy that he steals his identity, that I find it very interesting that he's like, oh, this is the best I can do. If you really want to cultivate an identity, you got to be like me. You got to kind of like have like no pictures of you on the internet, but but like a work history and everything else. It took me 10 years to cultivate this. And of course he's going like, I want your identity, right? So, but I love the fact that he says right before he gets knocked unconscious by the protagonist or antagonist, I guess, in this, or what we call him, like an anti-hero, that before he gets attacked, he basically says, you're lucky you're a white guy. No one suspects the white guy, just as he like crushes his skull. So that was clever for sure. Oh, and the second thing I would say is very clever in the show. It's something I don't appreciate in the show because I'm irritated by the over-the-top plotting. But like in reading a synopsis of the season, which is what I did after the fact, that you appreciate what the show's trying to do. And I think that in season 1, what they're doing cleverly is they're basically puncturing the traditional romantic comedy, right? Where you have like the girl and the guy, and there's all these crazy things that keep them apart and blah, blah, blah. And the joke is like, this is like the puncturing of the perfect guy. Wouldn't it be nice to meet that perfect guy? It's like that perfect guy is a stalker. That's the joke of season 1, like the meta joke of season 1. And in season 2, it's exactly what I said, where I was kind of like lulled in by the manic pixie dream girl motif of like, like whether it's Scott Pilgrim or these type of like male skewing romantic comedies, for lack of a better term, that they're like kind of like this idealized version of like the hip girl, that she's kind of like cooler than you expect. And in this case, it's like, oh, she's a psychopath, by the way.
Yes.
So I think that they're, intentionally taking these rom-com motifs and then intentionally satirizing them, right? So
I mean, I think season 1 is very much about the lens that we see certain actions through being colored with like how attractive the person is, how charming the person is, how we think about the person, that like the exact same actions done by a person you're not attracted to would be like, I need to get a restraining order.
Right.
But because you find this person attractive, it's romantic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly like how I feel about, this is how I always felt about, me as someone who's not a fan traditionally of romantic comedies, aside from like the classics, like When Harry Met Sally or something like that. But when you see like, How to Lose a Guy, what's the name of that movie? How to Lose a Guy?
Yeah.
Whatever. Like when you watch a movie like that, I'm like, this is straight up sociopathic behavior. Like if someone did this, they would be arrested multiple times.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be, oh, isn't she charming? It's like, no, she's a crazy person. And the show is just, this show, at its best, is pointing that out, so which I appreciate. So, but I can't watch it. But yeah, so that's my opinions on season 2, the little bit of season 2 of You that I watched. But I, like I said, it's not a full review on my part. I just found it very entertaining, like just kind of this experience of like saying like, well, what happens if I do try to just see the beginning and end? And I'm like, wow, not a good way to watch that show for sure.